Hello dear students, welcome to my YouTube channel. It's me Faisal Rao. I'm language and literature instructor. I have been teaching for last 8 years to different level from intro to masters and arts and spoken language classes. This is my series of English language and lecture series on YouTube channel. It's basically second lecture on literature. The first one was about general intro of English language literature, and it's about literary genres. Please do subscribe the channel. Here is my WhatsApp number. You can contact me after watching this video. If you have any questions, you may ask in the comment section as well as on WhatsApp. And if you are interested, you can join my online classes as well from wherever you are. So let's start today's lecture. It's about literary genres. We will define first what is genre, then we will discuss different genres mentioned here. So let's start. What is genre? Basically, genre is just like the synonym of types or the kinds. Literature is further divided into subcategories like poetry, like novel, fiction, non-fiction, drama, prose, etc. So all of these are collectively called genres, and one is genre. So the subcategories of literature is genre, and there are so many categories. Few of them will be mentioned here, will be explained briefly. Later on we will have detailed lecture on each and every genres. So it was a brief definition of genres. Literary genre means the classification or the subtypes of literature is called literary genre. Two are the major one. Here in this pic you may see the fiction and non-fiction are the basic categories in which literature is divided. We will first explain all of these terms, fiction, then non-fiction, and then later on we will discuss others. Here we start with fiction. Fiction is basically any piece of writing which is not real. It is totally based on the imaginative faculty of writer. Writer do write its own experiences, but in a very different scenario. And the experiences may be real, but his expression, his setting, his name of characters, location would be entirely fake. Fiction is basically taken from fictitious. Fictition is used for the non-real thing. So you can understand the meaning from fictitious, that's something based on unreal thing, imaginative. So all those pieces of writing which have no resemblance with reality will be classified into fiction. It was the brief and the most simplest definition of fiction. We will have some other definitions for better understanding. Here are two more definitions. Fiction is basically a dream of the writer. Writer do imagine things, he put on the page, and it becomes a piece of writing which is called literature. In the second paragraph of this slide, it is mentioned that it is not presented as fact. I mean, it's not something logical, it's not something based on hard and fast facts and figures. It's totally imaginative. So a story based on imagination is called fiction. This would be more simplest definition. The further we would go towards different types of function. Here are short stories, any brief narration about few characters having encircling any moment or experience of their life would be short story. We will have later on a detailed lecture on the intro of short story as well. Legend is something, a historical record of a person, but the things are imaginary, based on imagination. Fairy tales, letters, folk tale, memoirs, memoirs is something kept record. Novels, basically novel is taken from novella, which means a new, a fresh which is totally based on imagination. Things are simply created by the writer's imaginative faculty. A long narrative story, if we have to define novel in a very simplest way, it's a long narrative story based on imaginative faculty of the writer, in which almost all our different aspects of life are encircled. Short story have briefly explained already. Fables is also a type of story, but here is a difference, that the characters are animals. So when there is a story about, like you may have read in your school, fox, greedy dog, hare and tortoise, all these are the example of fables. Myth, if you go for the meaning of the word myth, it's about something very complex, very complicated. So things based on fictitious stories is called myth. So these were the few subcategories of fiction. Here are few more definitions. Generally, fiction is divided into three major categories. Mystery is something about hidden secrets. It may be a thrill story, it may be a murder story, there may be a hidden secret. A romance is about love, about feelings, about emotions, about relationship of man and woman. Mainly they end with happy ending. And science fiction is something related to the science. If you go for the definition of science, it is basically the systematic study of facts. So when the fiction adds with it, then writers do imagine that in upcoming world science may make such miracles. Like time machine was once a science fiction, robots were science fiction, mobile was science fiction. All the today happening were the science fiction, were the fiction of the past. So the fiction becomes reality. We can understand from this phenomena as well that fiction is, although the creative or imaginative faculty of the writer, but somehow, somewhere in the world, the things may happen accordingly, like the writer do imagine them, if the topic is of universal importance, as we defined the literature in the first lecture. I would recommend that if you have missed that lecture, you must go for that, so you may understand basic concept of literature. And next we will talk about non-fiction. Non-fiction, as when the non comes with any word, it negates the meaning of the word. Fiction was based on imaginative, so very contrary, very opposite to that, non-fiction will be the stories which are based on reality, which are based on the real names, situations. It may be the biography, it may be the autobiography, it may be the daily conversation, it may be letters, it may be an essay about any report writing, like this. So these things are called non-fiction. We will go further for its subcategories. So we defined non-fiction, which is stories based on reality, on the real experiences, name, places. Now we will see how non-fiction can be divided into further subcategories. Here is a list. Narrative non-fiction means a description of events. Biography, bio means life, and graphy is for writing, it's about life. Periodicals is the historical record of some era, some age, some country, some cities as well. Self-help book, you write down notes for your academic learning, that is based on real things, it's non-fiction. Reference books, you may have reference book for your academic studies, so these are also for the non-fiction categories. Textbook of your course, of your classes. is also non-fiction. Speech, a person making speech about any topic, about science, about art, about music, it is non-fiction because it has some reality in it. Essays may, if it's not based on scientific allusions, then definitely the essay is also are based on some specific hard and fast facts, so it is also from non-fiction. And memoir is again for the memories record of a person of some age, like we earlier mentioned in periodicals. It's basically on the personal level. Periodicals may be on the journal, on the country level. So it was non-fiction. Now we would go for the further subcategories of the literature. Till now, let me give you a brief idea what we have discussed yet. Literary genre means literature is divided into subcategories. These are called genres. There are two major categories, fiction and non-fiction. Fiction is something based on reality, based on imagination, based on creative faculty of the writer, like novels, short story, dramas, etc. While the non-fiction is something based on real name, events and person record. It may be like essay, speech, textbook, your notes, etc. So to avoid the boredom, we will divide this lecture into two parts, but we will definitely have few moments for time to explain at least two major genres here as well, prose and poetry. Let's see what is prose. Basically, the writing pattern also divides the literature into two major categories further, prose, poetry. When the writing is made in the form of paragraph and the simple straight sentences, it becomes prose. When there is a rhyme and meter, there is a rhythm, there is a music in the words, then it becomes poetry. So it is the basic division and the basic difference between prose and poetry. You can define them in this way. You can understand the difference of these two genres in these words I have already mentioned. I would explain again. Prose is an expression in the form of paragraph, straight sentences, while the poetry is the music of words. It would have their rhyme or meter. What is rhyme and meter? We will further explain in the poetry section. So the prose is a literary piece written in pattern of ordinary spoken, like we are talking right now, we are discussing things. This would be in the prose form. There is no music in the word. And if we talk about the etymology or the origin of the word prose, it is from the Latin word prosa, which means straightforward. When you talk about something without any figure of speech, without any example and simile, you're just talking straightforwardly, it would become prose according to its origin. Let's see how the prose is further divided into subcategories. Here is a table in which fiction and non-fiction is also again mentioned, that there are few genres, where few sub-genres in which prose is written, and it may be fiction if it is based on imagination, and it may be on reality if it is on the basis of real experiences, then it would be non-fiction. In fiction, the prose is in the form of short stories, legend, fairy tales, folk tales, novels, short stories, fables, myth, etc. All of these are already explained. While in non-fiction, the prose may be daily based writing like report, personal narrative. You do write your diary, that is non-fiction if you are writing in simple straight sentences, not in the form of poetry. Memoir, letter, article, journal and biographies. So these all things are written in the form of prose. Why? Because it is written in the simple straight sentences. So this was the basic definition of the prose and the subcategories of prose. Now we would go for the poetry. As I earlier mentioned, it is basically the expression of feelings, emotions and thoughts in the musical form. When there is a music, what is music? It's basically rhyme and meter which differentiate poetry from prose. When there is rhyme, what is rhyme? Rhyme is basically the sound system of the words, and the meter is basically a proper arrangement of the sounds within the line. We will define these things here in detail. So let's see what is poetry. Poetry is basically a language which is chosen or arranged to express its ideas, emotions through what? Sound and rhythm. Sound of same pattern, rhythm to create a music, which is also called meter. According to T.S. Eliot, a very renowned poet, let's see how he defined the poetry. Poetry can communicate before it is understood. Means a poetry have more better understanding than general perceptions, general writings. So the poetry is full of expression, full of understanding, full of meanings. Poetry is when an emotion can found its thought and the thought has found words. Means when the emotions are transformed into words, it will create a specific music and it becomes poetry. It was the definition from the Robert Frost, a poet. Now a very famous definition of poetry was given by William Wordsworth. Here is his definition. You must memorize these lines and must understand. It's a very comprehensive, a very detailed definition of poetry, which tells not only about what poetry is, it also tells how the poetry is formed, how the writer do write poetry. So let's see how the Wordsworth define poetry. Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. Basically here is a few spelling mistake. It is recollected in tranquility, not and tranquility. Okay, you may correct it by yourself. So let's try to understand what basically he means. First is spontaneous flow. Spontaneous means uncontrollable, unthoughtful, sudden, abrupt. You do express your feelings, not pre-planned. How? Powerful feelings which have a strong impact on you, which have captured you, which have completely taken you away from the reality. And in which state? Tranquility. If you know the meaning of tranquilizer, it is to intoxicate you. So you would understand that tranquility means that you are not in your senses, you are somewhere else. Your mental state is entirely different from the normal one, and then you do express your genuine emotions and feelings. Here, so this was the definition from William Wordsworth. Now we will move different kind of the poetry, but before that we must understand few more concepts, like we are talking about rhyme and meter. So what is rhythm, rhyme, and what is alliteration? You need to understand these concepts as well for better understanding of the poetry. The pattern of sound within a line, beat, speed in a poem it's like singing a song. Like in your school you may have sung different poems like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, how I wonder what you are. So you are the Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, like that. There is a music in the word. Words that sound the same, like which are called rhyming word, like cat, hat. Cat and hat have same pronunciation, they have same sound. Shoe and two also look like same, are similar. Alliteration is basically several words in a sentence are repeated, begin with same consonant sound. if different words having same sound and that is repeated, that would be but the sound should be of consonant sound, not the vowels. It would be, if there are vowel sound repetition, then it is called assonance. That would be later on defined somewhere. So let's see the kinds are the types of poetry. Poetry is basically further divided. We will have a detailed lecture on intro to poetry, in which each and every subcategory will be explained and will be given different examples as well. You may watch on our YouTube channel that lecture. Lyric is something musical. Narrative, it is basically a descriptive. Yes, we were talking about narrative. Narrative poetry is basically like epics, like elegy. They are having some music in the form of meter or the rhythm, but they may lack rhyming words, but still there is some pattern of music can be observed. Dramatic are when there is a dialogue. Wherever the drama word used, there must be some characters, there must be some situations, and there must be some dialogue or conversation between people. It may be dramatic drama as a genre. It may be dramatic poetry if there is a situation described in which there are characters and there is a conversation between two people. And special types are also given here. So further, lyric is divided into sonnet, as I earlier mentioned that we will define all of these subcategories in a detailed lecture on intro to poetry. You can watch that lecture on the same YouTube channel. I'll definitely simply give the name here: sonnet, elegy, ode, epic, ballad, social related to social issues, and dramatic monologue, soliloquy, character sketch, oration, haiku, cinquain, limerick, and name poem. So these are the further categories based on the subject or the subject matter of the poet or things discussed in the poetry. So here was a brief list of poetry types. Next we go for few more for better understanding of other name as well. Like we earlier mentioned, narrative, it is basically tells a story, have similar element to story like characters, situation, dialogue. Plot, what is plot? It is basically arrangement of events. And characters, it may be person, it may be animals as well. Haiku, it is specifically 3-line poem. Line in 3 stanzas would be there. Line wouldn't be the accurate word to define it. Line 1 to 5 is basically syllables. Line 2 to 7 and line 3 to line 1 to 3. Let me rephrase all of these things. It has 3 lines. Line 1 have 5 syllables. Syllables is basically we will define it we can define it in this way, that it is a combination of rise and fall of the sound. Rise and fall, one rise and one fall, or the 2 rise or the 2 fall, that would be 1 syllable, or the single unit of sound is also called syllable. Haiku on the second of this list, it is basically 3-line poem. What is the basic characteristic of this poem? This type of poem is that line 1 have 5 syllables. 5 syllables mean 1 unit of sound. A word which is pronunciated in a single sound is called 1 syllable. If there are 2 words, then it would be 2 syllable. If there are 3 words, then it would be 3 syllable. So 5 syllables mean 5 different words of unique sound. Line 2 have 7 syllables, line 3 have 5 syllables. So 5, 7, 5. This is the arrangement of this poem. Free verse have lack structure. There is no proper rhyme or meter, no regular rhyme, no line length or stanza pattern. Means it is totally away from simple structure, from stanza, from other patterns. It's entirely different. It looks like a little bit like prose. Lyric is basically specifically deals with feelings and thoughts. Single speaker, highly musical, means there are so many rhyming words are used. Ballads are for the song. Lyric poem which tells stories, deal with adventure and romance. It may be also in a description of some story, some drama, which can be poetic in its expression, so it would call ballad. Concrete have like subjects, means it has some specific arranged like to look like a picture. It gives a picture in the mind of reader or the listener when there is a description in front of him or her. It gave through images, through imagery, through figure of speech. What is all these words would be explained. These are different literary techniques to enhance the understanding or the impact of the feelings and expression. The last one is limerick, which is humorous in tone. It's a lightweight expression of feelings. Rhyming 5-line poem, there is a specific pattern of it. They have specific rhyme pattern, meaning the same rhyming scheme is used in this type of poem. So here was a brief different types of poetry. Here is an example of rhyme and meter. You have to understand and listen properly. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. This is rhyme. That there is a Humpty Dumpty having same sound. It's a rhyme. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. There is a rise and fall, a proper arrangement of rise and falls, which is called rhythm. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. So wall and all, these two are the rhyming words. Humpty Dumpty have the rhyming words, and the proper rise and fall of the sound within the line is rhythm. So this was the most simplest way to understand what basically poetry is. If you have to translate this poem into prose, like that Humpty Dumpty is sitting on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. Yes, suddenly fall. So this is how the prose and poetry is different. For better understanding of the difference, and it is the last final touch, prose use sentences while poetry use lines. It use paragraphs, it use stanzas. Here's a contrast or the comparison of prose and poetry. You would understand in a better way. Sounds similar to ordinary speech or writing. It looks like prose looks like speech or ordinary writing, while sound special or artistic because there are figure of speech, there is a sound system, there is rhyme and meter. It beautifies or the glorify the expression. May or may not be creative, like we have already done. That prose may be fiction and non-fiction. If it is creative, if it is imaginative, it is fiction, and if it is unreal, it is non-fiction. Has a main artistic purpose to share something personal. Poetry is mainly, although there are thoughts, there are huge subject matter is also discussed in the poetry. Like if you have read, you would read, if you're new in literature, then definitely you would study Milton. John Milton is a poet who wrote Paradise Lost, which is not expression of feelings. It is basically a grand subject of creation of universe, God, angels, Adam and Eve, all that thing. So but mainly the focus of poetry is emotions, while the main focus of prose is thought. So this is also a very unique difference in poetry. Although the both are there may be emotions in the prose as well, there are exceptions that poetry may also deal with the emotions and thoughts as well, if it mainly deals with emotions. So but mainly the main subject matter of the poetry is feelings. So here in this lecture, to avoid the boredom, I would stop here so we can make another part of this lecture. Let me summarize the things which we discussed in this part, and later on the remaining genre will be discussed in the part 2. In this lecture we define literary genre. Genre is basically for the classification or the type that literature is further divided into subcategories or kinds, which are called genres. There are two main genres of literature: fiction and non-fiction. Fiction is basically deal with the creative and imaginative faculty of man. It deals with unreal things. It is basically based on the non-living or non-real name, places and events. Further it is divided into different subcategories. The prose can be a short story, a legend, fairy tales, novels, short story, fables, myth, etc. We will have detailed lecture on each and every genre. Means there would be a lecture on fiction as well. You may watch the same lecture on the same channel. And next is non-fiction. It is very contrary, very opposite to the fiction. It deals with the real name, places, events, opposite of fiction. And how we divide it into subcategories are it is basically biography, periodicals, self-help book, reference text, speech, essay, memoir. Later on we discussed prose, that it is an expression in the form of straightforward lines, paragraphs, sentences. And the word prose is taken from Latin prosa, which means straightforward, while the poetry is entirely different. It is written in the rhyming words, and there is a meter, there is a specific music in the words, which makes it poetry. So the prose is entirely different. Prose is also divided into subcategories: fiction and non-fiction, short story, legend, fables. Here is a list, we discussed it earlier. And at the end we discussed poetry in detail, that it is basically an expression of feelings, emotions and thoughts in rhyming words, or there is a meter. Rhyme is basically a pattern of sounds, while the rhythm is basically arrangement of syllables. Syllables is a single unit of sound. The words are in poetry, the lines have some specific music in it, which makes it poetry. Here was the definition from Wordsworth: spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. That it is basically the sudden expression of feelings which overtook or which have controlled the human senses, and man's become genuine in its expression, which becomes very musical in its nature. While here we at the end we found a difference in prose, that if there is a written material and line and passages, then it is sentences and paragraphs, then it is prose, and there are lines and stanza, then it is poetry. The second difference was of speech. If there is an ordinary one and there is an artistic one mean having different techniques, different figure of speeches, different imagery in it, then it becomes poetry. Prose may be creative and non-creative, while poetry is totally creative. It is basically a human real artistic purpose of sharing his personal feelings and expression. So this was our first part on literary genres. You can watch the other genres from drama, novel, essay and short story in part 2. Stay in touch. If you have any question, you may ask in the comment section. Here is my contact number as well. You can contact me. Please do subscribe our channel. Do suggest how we can make these lectures more beneficial for you students. Thank you very much. Take good care of yourself.